The second thing the president said is, if we're going to be true friends, you have to treat our workers as fairly as we've treated Canadian workers for 40 years. Again, we have let so many people over the entire time that I've been alive take advantage of the United States of America. The president said, if you're going to apply a tariff to our goods, we're going to start applying a tariff to your goods too.
For decades, the relationship between the United States and Canada has been described as one of the strongest alliances in the world. The two countries share the longest undefended border on the planet, trade hundreds of billions of dollars every year, and cooperate on security, energy, and global diplomacy. But recently, a statement from Washington has sparked a new debate about that relationship. And behind the political language lies something much bigger, a shift in power. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance recently claimed that Canada has been taking advantage of the United States for decades. According to him, the relationship needs to fundamentally change. At first, it sounded like another political comment in an ongoing debate over trade and economic policy. But the timing of this statement raises an important question. Why now? For years, some leaders in Washington believed the United States held all the leverage in its relationship with Canada. After all, the American economy is much larger. Canada sends the majority of its exports south of the border. And historically, the United States has been Canada's largest trading partner by a massive margin. That created a simple assumption. Canada needed America more. Under the Trump administration, this assumption became part of a broader strategy. The idea was straightforward. Apply pressure through tariffs, threaten to walk away from trade agreements, create economic uncertainty. And eventually Canada would be forced to negotiate a deal more favorable to American interests. But that strategy didn't unfold the way Washington expected. Instead of rushing into negotiations, Canada took a very different approach. Rather than reacting to pressure, Canadian leadership decided to wait. There would be no rushed agreements, no concessions made under threats, and no acceptance of a deal that did not benefit Canada's long-term interests. That patience would eventually change the entire dynamic. Meanwhile, tensions between the two countries continued to grow. Tariffs were imposed on several industries. Trade negotiations became increasingly complicated, and political rhetoric on both sides began to intensify. From Washington's perspective, pressure was supposed to force Canada into a weaker position. But something unexpected happened. The global environment suddenly began to change. Geopolitical tensions around the world started affecting energy markets, supply chains, and global trade routes. One of the most significant developments came from the Middle East. Tensions with Iran began to disrupt one of the most important energy corridors on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through that narrow waterway. When shipping through the strait slows down or becomes unstable, the consequences ripple across the entire global economy. Oil prices rise, transportation costs increase, food production becomes more expensive, and energy security suddenly becomes a major geopolitical issue. This kind of disruption creates pressure everywhere. Countries begin searching for reliable sources of energy and raw materials. Supply chains that once seemed stable suddenly appear fragile, and governments start looking for partners they can trust during uncertain times. This is where Canada enters the picture in a completely different way. Canada is one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. The country has massive reserves of oil and natural gas. It is a major producer of fertilizer, and it controls large amounts of critical minerals that are essential for modern technology. In a stable global market, these resources are valuable. But in a crisis, they become strategic. And Canada has something even more important than resources. Stability. Canada is politically stable, economically developed, and geographically positioned right next to the United States. In a world where supply chains are increasingly uncertain, reliability becomes incredibly valuable. And Canada offers exactly that. Energy analysts and trade experts have started pointing out a new reality. The United States cannot easily replace Canada as an economic partner. The two economies are deeply integrated. Energy pipelines cross the border. Manufacturing supply chains depend on cooperation. And millions of jobs in both countries rely on this relationship. Walking away from that partnership would come with real consequences. Energy prices could rise, supply chains could break down, and industries that depend on cross-border trade could face serious disruption. That means leverage is no longer one-sided. It exists on both sides of the border.
World map slowly zooming out with Canada highlighted. Tech space for subscribe for more global analysis. Modern geopolitical documentary ending scene. This diversification strategy changes the balance of power. When a country relies on only one partner, it has fewer options. But when it builds relationships across multiple regions, it gains flexibility. And flexibility creates negotiating power. Canada now has more options than it did in the past. That doesn't mean the United States and Canada are suddenly adversaries. Far from it. The two countries remain close allies in security, intelligence, and defense cooperation. But alliances can still experience moments of tension, especially when economic interests collide. What we are seeing right now may be one of those moments. Political rhetoric is becoming stronger. Public statements are becoming more direct, and leaders on both sides are trying to shape public perception of the relationship. Statements like the one made by J.D. Vance may serve multiple purposes. They can rally domestic political support. They can signal negotiating positions. And sometimes, they can attempt to project strength even during moments of uncertainty. But behind the political language, the underlying reality is clear. The global economic environment is changing. Energy markets are shifting. Supply chains are becoming more fragile. And countries that control critical resources are gaining influence. Canada happens to be one of those countries. Its natural resources, geographic location, and political stability make it a key player in the modern global economy. That position gives Canada leverage in negotiations that may not have existed decades ago. For the United States, this creates a new strategic calculation. Maintaining strong economic ties with Canada may now be more important than ever, not just for trade, but for energy security, industrial supply chains, and geopolitical stability. In many ways, the relationship between the two countries is evolving. What was once seen as a one-sided dependency is becoming something more balanced, and that balance could shape the future of North American economics for years to come.